What's up guys, it's your boy Lotology here, and in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at ranking all 10 of the vocations in Dragon's Dogma 2, because after spending over 120 hours in Dragon's Dogma 2 and maxing out all 10 vocations, it's only logical that I would put together and rank all 10 vocations in the game from worst to best. Of course, this is all just based on my own personal preference with each of the vocations, as each of them are great in their own way and have a lot of fun build potentials. But with that being said, kick back, relax, and let's get into it. Now, coming in the 10th and last position is the Trickster vocation. For me personally, I just couldn't get into this vocation. I mean, not being able to do any reasonable damage whatsoever is definitely a bummer, and it's not a vocation that I would heartily recommend to anyone. Though of course there is some fun to be had with this vocation, especially if you're going to do a solo run with the Trickster by tempting enemies into falling to their deaths. But personally, I played the Trickster as a party buffer that both distracts and disorientates the enemies so that my pawns could finish them off, which I think is the way to go with this vocation. Though when it comes to the abilities, I wasn't really a fan of the Meister skill Dragon's Delusion for the Trickster, and even though it looked really cool, it tended to scare away enemies and didn't garner any XP whatsoever, which made trying to rank up this vocation for this video an absolute pain. Though I will say the one good thing I enjoyed with the Trickster was getting the whimsical daydream sensor, which can be obtained from completing the Sphinx riddles, and it's definitely worth it since you can farm an absolute ton of gold. But other than that, this vocation comes in last position for me. Now, coming in at number 9, we have the Mage vocation. By a general rule of thumb, I really don't like playing the healer or support character in my games, whether that be Dragon's Dogma 2 or even a cleric type character like in Baldur's Gate 3. For me, the gameplay is just lackluster and just not that fun. There is some good utility with this vocation, like the ability to heal your pawns, enchant their weapons with different types of elemental damage like lightning, fire and ice, and the mage can actually deal some forms of damage, which unlike the Trickster, which does absolutely no damage. When it comes to the Meister ability for the mage, the Celestial Paean, or whatever it's called, it does have a cool visual effect, and it does make sure your party members have unlimited stamina regen, but it does leave you vulnerable for a short period of time, which if your party members bug out, leaves you quite vulnerable to attacks. So while I enjoy the visual effect of the Meister skill, just like Dragon's Delusion from the Trickster vocation, I just find it not that fun to use, and why I rank the mage 9th. But with that being said, if you have a pawn in your party that's a mage, it can make the game ridiculously easy. But as for playing as one, I didn't really have a good time. Now, coming in at number 8, we have the Archer vocation. This is a classical range vocation that, while not my favourite by any means, I had a lot of fun with, especially if you want to roleplay as an elf archer type character, which the Archer definitely lends itself to. Though personally, I think the Archer can be quite limited in terms of overall abilities, because if you want to utilize most of the abilities in the vocation, you have to scavenge for these special arrow types, which I really didn't enjoy doing since you would run out very quickly, especially because combat is so frequent in this game. So I ended up using the abilities that didn't use any special arrows, and while they were fun to use and gave me these strong Legolas Lord of the Rings type vibes, I just couldn't justify putting this vocation higher on the list, since there are many vocations that are much more fun to play and have a better damage output. Even the Meister skill for the Archer, Heavenly Shot, is not really anything to write home about, as it does do a decent amount of damage, but ends up using all of your stamina bar for something that visually is not that impressive to me. The Archer overall is great for role-playing, but there are better choices for vocations. Now, coming in at number 7, we have the Fighter vocation. Now, I know many people would probably rank this vocation much higher, but personally, while I really enjoyed the all-around damage output of the Fighter, I just think from a having fun perspective, the Fighter falls a little flat, both in terms of gameplay and damage. Though with that being said, the Fighter does have a lot of cool looking abilities, and it does have some good utility as being the party face, and the Meister skill Righteous Fury can be unlocked quite early in the game, which many people will appreciate. And the skill itself does a ton of good damage, but if an enemy moves out of range of the attack, which happens quite frequently with smaller enemies like goblins, it leaves you quite vulnerable to attacks. You won't really have this issue with like griffins and dragons and stuff like that, but with smaller enemies, I definitely wouldn't recommend using this Meister skill. Though the fighter is a great choice for people who just want the simple and safe choice for a vocation, and it definitely still has its merits, but personally I wouldn't rank it any higher on this list. Now coming in at number 6, we have the warrior vocation. I particularly like this vocation for how tanky it is and for how much damage you can output with the weapons, not to mention the amount of cool looking swords, hammers and maces which are unique to the warrior vocation that make it much more enjoyable for me compared to the fighter. Plus, I have to mention I absolutely love how many cool abilities the warrior has from both a utility and combat perspective that just make it much more fun and enjoyable compared to the fighter class. And if you want that berserker type character for role-playing purposes, this is definitely the vocation for you. Though the only downside for the vocation, in my opinion, is the Maester skill Arc of Might, which compared to the standard abilities I just find really lackluster and not as fun to use. Not to mention unlocking the vocation from Baron can be a bit of a pain with all of the travelling involved. Coming in at number 5, we have the Magic Archer. Now I really enjoyed playing with this vocation, and it is infinitely more fun to use compared to the standard Archer. The way the arrows stream in the air towards the enemy is super satisfying, and being able to target different weak points on the enemies with 2 modes of fire is really fun. And the ability to utilize more magical and elemental type abilities in combat is really cool too. Though I think the highlight of this vocation is definitely the ricochet shot, which absolutely shreds enemies to pieces, especially in cavernous and closed off areas throughout the map, which I think is awesome. As for the Maester skill, similar to the Warrior's Maester skill, I just found the Martyr's Bolt not that fun to use and found that the overall class was better than the Maester skill itself, which is why I ranked this vocation 5th on my list. Not to mention, the fun factor with the Magic Archer does start to drop off the more you use it, and the initial fun that you have with it will kind of die off eventually. Now coming in at number 4, we have the Sorcerer vocation. I have to preface this by saying that usually in most games that have builds and classes and whatnot, I tend to avoid the builds that involve magic, but using the Sorcerer in Dragon's Dogma 2, I had a lot of fun. And all the abilities and damage output that you can do with this vocation is wild. And compared to the Mage, there is a night and day difference in terms of the fun factor. All of the Sorcerer abilities are really fun to use, and the Sorcerer is also one of the few vocations that gets 2 Maester skills instead of 1, which includes both the Meteoron and Maelstrom abilities, which visually look really cool and do an absolute crazy amount of damage, which makes playing as the Sorcerer a lot of fun, especially if you want to play as the magic damage dealer in your party. Though something I really need to mention about the Sorcerer vocation in particular is that the Maester skills and acquiring them specifically for this vocation can be an absolute pain in the ass to gather, so if you really want those 2 skills, I would highly recommend looking up a guide or a walkthrough on how to get them, because trying to figure it out by yourself can definitely give you a bit of a headache. Now down to the final 3, and coming in at number 3, we have the Warfarer vocation. The Jack of all trades, Master of none. The trade-off being that you can't use any Maester skills, but the vocation allows you to use and equip any weapon in the game and allows you to equip up to 3 different abilities that you can swap between, which I think not only gives you a lot of utility, but makes for a lot of fun gameplay. Like for example, in my first playthrough as my Kratos character, I used daggers, a spear, a magic bow, and a heavy sword to roleplay and represent the Blades of Chaos, the Dropnir Spear, the Bow of Apollo, and the Blade of Olympus, respectively, from the God of War franchise, which made playing as my Kratos character in Dragon's Dogma 2 a lot of fun. Of course, there are much more powerful combinations with weapons and abilities you can use, but I chose these weapons specifically for aesthetic reasons. Which I absolutely love about the Warfarer is having fun and making your character look however you want, like having warrior gear for the best knockdown resistance, for example. But from a pure power perspective, the Warfarer can't reach the heights of my top 2 picks in terms of gameplay and damage output. Now coming in at number 2 is the Mystic Spearhand. This vocation is arguably my personal favourite in the game, and there's good reason for that. The Mirror Shield ability makes both you and your party members immune to all forms of damage for up to 5 seconds when upgraded, and the amount of damage you can output with the spear is so awesome. Not to mention all the animations for this vocation just look so good, and all of the magical abilities are so fun. especially yeeting goblins into the stratosphere or levitating wolves like a Jedi Master. This class is way too fun, and even using the dragon's foin ability to reach harpies and flying enemies gives this class a lot of freedom of movement, which I absolutely love. Lastly, I gotta mention the Maester skill that you can learn from Sigurd, which is the Wild Fury ability, which when upgraded in New Game Plus especially, absolutely shreds enemies to pieces and is well worth using, but when you do, the game becomes way too easy. Like seriously, are Capcom gonna release a hard mode or what? Now coming in at number 1, and objectively the best vocation in Dragon's Dogma 2, is the Thief. While not my personal favourite, there's not really much to debate on when it comes to the Thief. The only vocation that actually gives you a dodge ability, and the second vocation that gives you 2 Maester skills instead of 1, that being the Formless Feint and the Blades of Pyre abilities. Basically, the way combat goes with the Thief is you activate Formless Feint to make yourself immune to all damage, use the Blades of the Pyre for a ridiculous amount of fire damage, and then utilize the Skull Splitter ability to absolutely shred dragons and all other types of enemies to pieces. This is arguably how most people are going to play, because I know I did, and I had a lot of fun doing it. From a utility perspective, using the Plunder ability to farm Worm Life crystals is super useful in the Unmourned world, and the Rope ability that pulls enemies out of the sky and towards you for an instant kill. Like seriously, anyone could easily solo this game as a thief, and would literally have no trouble finishing it off. Now that is my final ranking and thoughts on all 10 vocations in Dragon's Dogma 2. And now I want to hear from you guys. Do you agree with my overall ranking of the vocations? Are there any of the vocations you would have put higher or even lower? Let me know in the comments. And I would like to say a big thank you to my channel members for supporting my content, and if you guys enjoyed this video, then smash that like button, and if you'd like to see more ranking videos like these, or even more of my content, then consider subscribing. With that being said, I hope all of my fellow Arisen have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.